The wind howled across the Iranian plateau, sweeping dust over forgotten stones and buried tombs. Before Persia had a name, before it had borders or kings or scribes to remember them, there were tribes, scattered, fierce, proud. Among them were the Anshan people, quiet farmers and stubborn fighters, vassals under the yoke of a foreign king. The Medes. The Median Empire ruled the East with an iron hand cloaked in ceremony. Their king, Astyages, sat on a throne built atop fear and tradition. His court was draped in silks and superstition, and his enemies were either enslaved or erased. But like all empires before their fall, his was built on shaky ground. What Astyages feared most, the dreams came often. Visions of rivers flooding the land, of vines growing from his daughter's womb that swallowed cities whole. The priests whispered interpretation with trembling lips. "Your daughter's son will dethrone you." Astyages laughed in public and trembled in private. So when Mandane, his daughter, married a low-born Persian noble named Cambyses, the king watched with suspicion. When a child was born, he acted. The baby, named Cyrus, was to be killed. He summoned Harpagus, his trusted general, and gave him the unthinkable task: take the child, dispose of him. No body, no trace. Harpagus took the bundle in his arms and for a moment looked into the boy's eyes. Something in them unsettled him. They were too still, too aware. He couldn't do it. Instead, he handed the infant to a shepherd and his wife in the hills, telling them to raise the boy as their own, or else. And so the future King of Kings suckled on goat's milk, ran barefoot among stones, and learned the language of the land not from scholars, but from wind and fire and fight. Years passed. The boy grew. Cyrus became tall, fast, cunning. He stood out among the shepherd boys, not just for his strength, but for the way he carried silence like a sword. When the truth of his birth came crashing down, it came not from lips, but blood. Harpagus, shamed and punished for defying Astyages, had waited patiently for years. And when he learned that Cyrus still lived, he didn't seek revenge. He sought a spark. The Medes were bloated, their soldiers loyal in name only, their subjects restless. Harpagus sent messengers, secret words hidden in the guts of animals, a call to arms, to old allies and new, to Persia. Cyrus, now a young man, stood on a ridge and looked over the valleys of Anshan. These were his people, farmers, riders, wanderers, but they had never known unity. He didn't promise them riches, he didn't offer glory. He gave them one thing: freedom from tribute, from fear, from Median chains. What began as whispers in the hills became a march of fire and steel. He had no army, just loyalty, no palace, just open sky, no crown, just cause. But he had purpose, and purpose, when fed with history's silence, becomes a storm. The rebellion didn't begin with a trumpet or war drum. It began with footsteps, bare and blistered, spreading word from village to village. Cyrus has risen. 3 words, that's all it took. In the foothills of Anshan and the cracked plains of Fars, the name passed like fire across dry brush. He had no right to the throne, no wealth, no standing army. But he had something greater, belief, not just his own, but the belief of men who had nothing to lose. Shepherds, ex-slaves, forgotten sons, warriors passed over by the Median court. All came, and they didn't come for plunder. They came to follow a man who spoke of the impossible, not as a dream, but as an inevitability. The Medes, caught off guard, laughed at first. A band of rebels in the mountains was hardly a threat to a royal army. Astyages, too, dismissed it as noise. He had seen worse, crushed worse. What he didn't see, what no one saw, was the slow collapse of loyalty beneath his own walls. Harpagus, the general once disgraced by the king, became a ghost within the court, still wearing his uniform, still giving orders, but now with a different agenda. He sent false reports to Astyages, delayed reinforcements, undermined morale. Every movement he made was a thread quietly pulled from the empire's fabric. Cyrus, meanwhile, moved with precision. He didn't strike cities, he struck hearts. He freed villages rather than conquered them. He paid for supplies. He protected women and children. Word of this spread faster than his armies. "He is not a warlord," they whispered. "He is a king we choose." Then came the first battle. Cyrus led a force barely trained, half-armed, into the plains of Hurba, where the Median forces waited. Twice their number, veterans of a dozen campaigns. But they were tired, paid, not loyal, trained, not inspired. Harpagus had seeded hesitation among their ranks, and Cyrus brought fire. They didn't win through force, they won through collapse. The Median line buckled not under sword, but silence. The kind that follows when men lay down arms not from fear, but from the absence of belief. News of the defeat traveled fast. Astyages erupted in fury. This was no longer a rebellion. It was betrayal. He called for every loyal general, summoned every last warrior. His court emptied into the field. The last king of the Medes would not fall without spectacle. Back in Persia, Cyrus didn't celebrate. He sharpened. He trained his men with the discipline of wolves. He studied the land, the seasons, the tactics of the empire he once served. And as the winter faded and spring winds began to stir the grass, he whispered to the stars. Now, spring came like a warning. The snow on the mountains receded slowly, revealing narrow passes and ancient paths long unused. Cyrus moved his army early, before the Medes expected. He knew the terrain better than any general in Astyages' court. He moved like smoke, crossing ridges at night, camping in dry riverbeds by day. His army was lean and quiet. They hunted for food. They repaired their own weapons. They needed no caravan, no palace in tow. In Ecbatana, the Median capital, panic disguised itself as pomp. Astyages stood tall before his court, dressed in robes that shimmered like fire, giving speeches about destiny and divine right. But fear dripped from every servant, every chamberlain, every commander who whispered to Harpagus in passing. The old king still believed he could outmatch a boy raised in goat pens. He hadn't yet grasped that what Cyrus was building wasn't just an army. It was a nation without borders, born not of treaties or inheritance, but of shared fire. Even his enemies admired him. Some defected, others simply vanished before battle, leaving their swords behind in the sand. Then came Pasargadae. Astyages gathered his full strength, tens of thousands. Seasoned warriors, archers, charioteers. He marched west, vowing to break Cyrus in open field. The armies met near Pasargadae, an old trade route nestled between ridges. The earth was dry, the wind sharp. Two worlds faced each other, one armored in tradition, the other armed with purpose. Cyrus spoke to his men before dawn. No rallying cry, just truth. They believe because they were born above you, they will die above you. Prove them wrong. The battle began at sunrise. Median chariots tore across the field, wheels screaming. But Cyrus's men had scattered oil and thorns across the ground. The wheels shattered, horses panicked, archers loosed volleys into smoke but struck nothing. Cyrus waited, then struck. From the flanks, he sent his cavalry, light, fast, ruthless. Harpagus, commanding a division under Astyages, turned his men the wrong way on purpose. Confusion rippled through the Median ranks. What was once formation became collapse. In the center, Cyrus charged. He wasn't watching from a ridge. He was in it, sword drawn, blood on his face, fighting like a man with no tomorrow. By dusk, the Medes were broken. Astyages fled with what few remained. His banners lay trampled, his generals silent. Harpagus watched the sky, saying nothing. But Cyrus didn't pursue. Not yet. Astyages fled with what few remained. His banners lay trampled, his generals silent. Harpagus watched the sky, saying nothing. But Cyrus didn't pursue. Not yet. He walked the battlefield, saw the bodies of men who had fought for someone they feared, and he said quietly to one of his captains, "No man should ever die for a throne he does not believe in." The Persians buried their dead with stones and prayers. The Medes left theirs to the wind. But Astyages was not done. In his palace, stripped of half his court, he plotted a final stand, not just to keep his crown, but to erase the memory of rebellion forever. And Cyrus, now blooded, hardened, and no longer a shepherd's son, prepared to march on a king who had once tried to erase him from history. The road to Ecbatana, the heart of the Median Empire, stretched across scorched valleys and broken loyalties. Cyrus didn't rush. He knew the final blow was not about speed. It was about message. He didn't want to simply take the city. He wanted the people to welcome him in, not as a conqueror, but as a return. Inside the city, Astyages grew restless. The walls of Ecbatana were tall and ancient, but walls were only as strong as the hands defending them. He executed suspected traitors in the court. He doubled the patrols. He called for omens, demanded the priests explain the silence of the gods. All he heard were echoes. Astyages' final army, hastily assembled, was little more than a show. Mercenaries paid in promises, nobles more interested in survival than sacrifice. The heart had gone out of the empire. But Astyages still had pride. And pride in the hands of the desperate is a dangerous weapon. Cyrus paused his army 3 days from the city. He let word spread. He let merchants and scouts ride ahead. Rumors did more damage than siege engines ever could. Cyrus is no longer a rebel, they said. He is justice. He does not burn cities. He builds them. Inside the palace, Harpagus stood again before Astyages, the man who once ordered him to kill a newborn, the man who had fed Harpagus his own son's flesh as punishment. The moment was heavy with unspoken vengeance. Astyages looked into the eyes of the man he had wronged and saw the answer. That night, Ecbatana did not sleep. Cyrus launched a swift strike, not on the walls, but within. With the help of defectors, the gates were opened from inside. Torches lit the sky, but no flames rose from homes, no temples were looted. In the chaos, Astyages was captured. There was no grand duel, no royal blood spilled in the throne room. He was taken by his own guards, too tired of fear to defend him. Cyrus entered the palace not as an invader, but as a man reclaiming stolen legacy. He stood before Astyages, now old, thin, draped in robes too heavy for his sunken frame. The old king looked up and, for the first time in years, said nothing. Cyrus did not strike him. He raised his hand and forgave him. The court gasped. "This is not the age of revenge," Cyrus said. "This is the age of truth." Some called it weakness. Others saw it as the birth of a new kind of power, one that did not feed on blood alone. The Medes were given a choice: resist and be forgotten, or join and be remembered. Many chose to join. Some called it weakness. Others saw it as the birth of a new kind of power, one that did not feed on blood alone. The Medes were given a choice: resist and be forgotten, or join and be remembered. Many chose to join, but outside Ecbatana, the world was watching. The Babylonian king, Nabonidus, grew anxious. Egypt stirred. Lydia, with its gold and its oracles, weighed its options. Cyrus had taken one empire. Now, greater thrones waited to be tested. The war for Persia was over. The war for the world had begun. The name Cyrus spread beyond the Zagros mountains, beyond the rivers of Elam, carried by caravans, whispered by diplomats, feared by kings. In Babylon, Nabonidus frowned as he listened to reports from the east. The Medes had fallen without fire. The boy who was supposed to die had taken a capital without a siege. This was no desert upstart. This was a force with momentum. But Babylon was different, older, richer, deeply entwined in gods and pride. Its walls were legendary, so wide that chariots could race on top. Its priests held power equal to kings, and its people worshipped Marduk with rituals older than memory. Cyrus knew better than to attack it blindly. To conquer Babylon was to conquer belief itself. But Cyrus didn't begin with soldiers. He began with symbols. He allowed Median nobles to keep their lands under Persian rule, turning former enemies into administrators. He married Cassandane, a Median princess, uniting two bloodlines before a drop of war was spilled. He didn't erase what came before, he absorbed it. His empire was a tapestry, not a monolith. In the west, Lydia watched closely. King Croesus, famed for his golden wealth, sought omens from Delphi. The oracle gave him a cryptic answer: If you cross the river, a great empire will fall. He believed it would be Persia. He prepared for war, but Cyrus wasn't distracted. He looked south. Babylon was rotting beneath its marble skin. The people resented Nabonidus, who had alienated the priesthood by exalting a lesser god. He had left the city for years to live in the desert, leaving his son Belshazzar to rule in excess. Cyrus knew the gods of the people better than the kings who claimed to serve them. He began to write not just war plans, but scripture. In clay tablets and proclamations, he presented himself not as a destroyer, but as a liberator, sent by the gods to restore order. He would not defile temples. He would rebuild them. He would not silence languages. He would honor them. Even as the Persian army advanced, they carried not just weapons, but declarations. Cyrus is chosen. Marduk turns his favor. It was psychological war, and it worked. As Cyrus approached the Tigris, Babylon began to tremble, not from siege, but from doubt. Inside the city, Belshazzar threw feasts and mocked the threat. He used sacred vessels stolen from older temples. He poured wine and laughed as walls held strong. Outside the walls, Cyrus made no move, not yet. He studied the Euphrates, its course, its flood cycles, its weaknesses. He met with engineers, farmers, former Babylonian officials now loyal to Persia. He planned not a war, but a ritual, a rite of transformation. And then, in one night, the river began to vanish. Cyrus had diverted the Euphrates upstream, draining the water level just enough for his soldiers to wade through the riverbed under cover of night. Babylon's gates, left open for the flow of the water, became its undoing. By dawn, Persian banners flew within the city. There was no bloodbath, no siege engines, no scorched earth. The temples stood untouched. The people woke to find new rulers who spoke their language, honored their gods, and punished none. Cyrus entered not as a conqueror, but as a fulfillment of prophecy. He bowed in the temple of Marduk. He issued the Cyrus cylinder, a decree of restoration engraved in Akkadian cuneiform. He freed enslaved peoples, including the Jews, and sent them back to rebuild their homeland. Babylon had not fallen. It had been reborn. The world had never seen power used this way, and the kings who still sat on their thrones realized something terrifying. Cyrus didn't just win battles. He rewrote the rules of empire. The dust of Babylon hadn't settled when news reached Sardis. Croesus, king of Lydia, stared at the scrolls brought by his envoys. Babylon, the unconquerable, had opened its gates to a man born in the hills of Anshan. The city had fallen not in battle, but in belief. Croesus's fingers drummed against his golden throne, each tap echoing like a countdown. He had been watching Cyrus. From the day the boy dethroned Astyages, Lydia had prepared for conflict, but Croesus didn't fear swords. He had gold, and with gold came armies, alliances, and oracles. He turned to Delphi again. "If you cross the river," the oracle repeated, "a great empire will fall." It was the same answer. Croesus smiled. To him, there was no ambiguity. His wealth was immeasurable, his cavalry unmatched. He commanded alliances with Egypt and Sparta. Persia was fast, yes, But fast things burn quickly. He ordered the Halys River crossed. War was no longer a question. Cyrus, deep in Babylon, read the movements before they happened. He had learned that gold could buy silence, but not loyalty. That temples could hold more power than swords. That speed alone did not win wars, but understanding why men fight, that was the key. Lydia was rich, but disconnected. Its people were distant from its crown. Its soldiers served coin, not cause. Still, Croesus was no fool. His army was well organized, seasoned, supported by allies from across the Aegean. He moved with precision, believing that a swift strike before winter could halt the Persian tide. Cyrus didn't meet him head-on. He waited. He allowed Croesus to extend, to grow confident, to build a rhythm. Then winter fell, sudden and sharp. Snow choked the mountain passes. Croesus, thinking the season would halt the campaign, returned to Sardis to regroup until spring. But Cyrus didn't stop. He pursued through the cold, across frozen ridges and narrow canyons. His men, hardened by years of mobile warfare, advanced where others would have waited. Croesus was caught unprepared. His mercenaries dispersed. His main force scattered. The armies finally clashed on the plains outside Sardis. Lydia's cavalry surged forward, shining like a tide of bronze. But Cyrus had studied their strength. He countered with a line of camels, their stench and unfamiliar movement spooking the horses, breaking the charge. Lydian formations fell apart. Cyrus did not press recklessly. He let confusion erode the will to fight. And when Croesus's own guards began to retreat, the Golden King realized the prophecy too late. His was the empire that would fall. Sardis fell within days. Its fabled treasury, the richest in the known world, was now Persian. But Cyrus did not gloat. He treated Croesus with honor, allowing him to live. Some say he even welcomed him as an advisor. The man who had once measured power in coins now witnessed a different currency: loyalty, discipline, vision. The conquest of Lydia sent shockwaves through the Mediterranean. Egypt braced, Sparta withdrew. The oracles fell silent. Persia was no longer a rising power. It was an inevitability. But Cyrus knew better than to mistake victory for permanence. Empires didn't die in battle. They decayed from within. So while others feared his armies, he began shaping something far more dangerous. A system, one that could last beyond his own breath. The dust of conquest had barely settled, but Cyrus didn't rest. He stood atop the hills of Sardis, not admiring gold, but surveying maps. His mind wasn't on what he had taken, it was on what must now be built. Victory was fleeting. Empires that burned too bright burned fast. If he wanted Persia to last, it had to become more than him. He began with the land. Where others imposed, Cyrus integrated. Each province, whether Median, Babylonian, Lydian, or Persian, was governed not by foreign lords, but local leaders who pledged loyalty. He didn't erase identities. He preserved them under a single system. This empire wouldn't speak one language. It would recognize many. Cyrus understood that unity came not from domination, but design. He created satrapies, regional governorships overseen by trusted administrators. each responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and protecting their people. These governors were powerful but accountable. Behind each satrap, a network of royal inspectors, the king's eyes, moved in silence. No man, not even the king himself, was above scrutiny. He also established a standardized system of weights and measures, improved trade routes, and protected caravans. The Silk Road, long a patchwork of dangers, began to feel like a highway. Merchants from Indus to the Aegean found safety under the Persian banner. With safety came prosperity. With prosperity, stability. But Cyrus didn't just build roads and governance. He built myth. In Babylon, his image was carved into clay, the liberator. In Lydia, the just conqueror. In Persia, the father of nations. His propaganda was subtle, rooted in truth, and spread not by force, but by echo. He wasn't worshipped like a god. He was honored like a principle. Still, not all threats came from outside. In the shadows of this vast expansion, small fires began to flicker. Not all nobles approved of tolerance. Not all priests embraced plurality. Even in Persia, some whispered that the king had grown soft, that the blood of the old gods demanded conquest, not compromise. Cyrus heard these whispers and welcomed them. He allowed dissent. He believed if a system couldn't survive criticism, it wasn't strong enough to endure time. Yet his eyes stayed sharp, his spies sharper. Meanwhile, far to the east, tribes in Bactria and Sogdiana began stirring, and to the west, Egypt remained untouched, its pharaohs watching warily, aware that their time might be borrowed. But Cyrus didn't look west. He looked east, not for more territory, but for ideas. He sought scholars, mystics, engineers. He didn't just want to rule the world. He wanted to understand it. And in this, he began creating something more revolutionary than empire. He created civilization with intention. Where Hammurabi brought law, Cyrus brought structure. Where the Assyrians brought fear, Cyrus brought strategy. Where kings before had only taken, he built. And the name Persia began to mean something more than place. It meant possibility. Years passed. Cyrus was no longer the shepherd boy rebel. He was now the Shahanshah, the king of kings. Across deserts and rivers, across broken thrones and rebuilt temples, his name echoed. Where he once walked barefoot among goats, now his shadow stretched over half the known world. But his pace never slowed. He rode at the front of his armies. He visited distant provinces unannounced. He spoke to governors like equals, to beggars like kings. His court was simple, his words direct. He allowed no golden cage to enclose him. Yet beneath the strength, age crept. The lines on his face deepened. The silence in his council meetings grew heavier. He had built a machine that spanned cultures, beliefs, and thousands of miles. But Cyrus had no illusion. It could collapse the moment his breath left it. So he began to plan not for war, but for legacy. He called forth his sons, Cambyses, the elder, proud and hot-blooded, Bardia, the younger, clever but quiet. He saw in them reflections of himself and also the shadows that could undo everything he built. He didn't crown either yet. Instead, he taught. Power, he told Cambyses, is not what you hold. It is what others give you willingly. Trust, he told Bardia, is the only currency that survives when armies fail. Still, he knew wisdom could not be inherited. Meanwhile, far to the northeast, the Massagetae, a fierce nomadic tribe, rose in defiance. Their queen, Tomiris, refused to bow to Persia. She ruled not with palaces, but with blood oaths and warriors who drank horse milk and lived without walls. Cyrus, though warned, chose to face them himself. It was a strange campaign. He tried negotiation first, offering marriage to Tomiris. She laughed and refused. He offered alliance. She called it deceit. And when her son, leading a vanguard against Cyrus, was captured, Cyrus tried to treat him with honor. But the young prince, in shame, took his own life. Tomiris swore vengeance. What followed was a brutal, unfamiliar war. Cyrus was not fighting cities. He was fighting ghosts, nomads who struck and vanished, who knew every valley and hid their dead in rivers. He began to doubt. He wrote fewer letters. He rode longer, slept less. Then came the final ambush. Details were never clear. Some say Cyrus was lured into a trap, others that his scouts failed, but the result was the same. In a narrow canyon, Cyrus fell. Some say he fought to his last breath, refusing to die on his knees. Others claim he smiled, knowing his empire would outlive him. Tomiris found his body. Legend says she cut off his head and dipped it in a skin filled with blood, declaring, "You thirsted for blood, drink your fill." But even she could not erase what he had done. Cyrus's generals carried his body back with reverence. His tomb, simple and silent, rose in the city of Pasargadae. No gold, no towers, just stone, just truth. Inscribed on it, the words, "O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, I am Cyrus, who founded the Persian Empire. Do not envy me this bit of earth that covers my body." The dust of the battlefield had settled, but the weight of Cyrus's absence fell heavier than any storm. Across Persia, from the marble halls of Babylon to the stone alleys of Persepolis, people didn't mourn the loss of a king. They mourned the silence that followed his name. Cyrus had not ruled by fear. His power wasn't tied to palaces or armies. He had woven his image into the hopes of farmers, the protection of scribes, the freedom of the enslaved. Without him, the empire stood, but did it breathe? Cambyses, his eldest son, was crowned hastily. He had strength, but lacked his father's patience. Where Cyrus listened, Cambyses commanded. Where Cyrus forgave, Cambyses punished. The court stiffened. Advisors whispered with caution, not counsel. The empire began to feel the tension of a crown that no longer adapted. It pressed. One of Cambyses's first targets was Egypt, the last untouched jewel. His father had planned diplomacy. He chose war. The invasion was swift and brutal. Egypt, despite its monuments and gods, had grown soft. Cambyses captured Memphis, executed Pharaoh Psamtik III, and declared himself Pharaoh of Egypt. But the victory was hollow. Far from the capital, rumors spread. Some said Bardia, Cambyses' brother, had been secretly murdered. Others claimed he had escaped and raised a rebellion. The people whispered Cyrus would never have allowed this. In the marketplaces, on the roads, in the temples, loyalty began to splinter. Cambyses, returning from Egypt, heard the rumors grow louder than his own commands. In the desert, en route to suppress the rebellion, he died. Some said from a wound to the thigh, others by his own hand. What followed was chaos. A man calling himself Bardia took the throne. He promised tax relief, cancelled conscriptions, won the hearts of the common people almost instantly. But in the shadows, the nobility stirred. 7 Persian lords, claiming the man was an impostor. A Magian priest posing as the king's brother, plotted in silence. Among them was Darius, a young noble of the Achaemenid bloodline. Ambitious, sharp, cold. He and the 6 conspirators stormed the palace, killed the supposed Bardia, and declared Darius the rightful heir. The court fractured. The empire, once built on unity, now balanced on blade edges and betrayal. But Darius wasn't a man of theater. He didn't weep for Cyrus, nor did he try to replace him. He studied him. He read his policies, retraced his roads, spoke with his old generals, and then, quietly, deliberately, he began to rebuild not just the government, but belief. Darius reorganized the satrapies, installed new legal codes, built a system of messengers so efficient it became legend. He crushed revolts in Elam, Babylon, and Egypt, not with cruelty, but with efficiency. Yet something had changed. Cyrus had built an empire of hearts. Darius was building a machine. And while the empire grew larger, more ordered, more advanced, one question began to echo across its temples and marketplaces. Could the dream survive without the dreamer? Years turned like worn pages. Cyrus was gone, but his name endured. In laws, in stone, in stories whispered to children who had never seen his face. Darius ruled with precision, expanding the empire beyond even what Cyrus had dreamed. He built Persepolis, a city of pillars and protocol, of order and symbolism. But something was missing, something intangible. Cyrus had ruled not by architecture or fear, but by resonance. He didn't just conquer land, he conquered memory. Darius understood this, even as he tightened the empire's grip. He respected the past, even as he reshaped it. His roads connected cities like veins. His royal messengers carried orders from the Indus to the Aegean faster than thought. But as administration flourished, faith in the myth began to fade. People obeyed the empire, but fewer believed in it. Still, the structure held. Through Darius, through his son Xerxes, through generations. But the world was changing. To the west, restless city-states stirred. Athens, Sparta, places Cyrus had never touched. Their ideas were different. Their gods argued. Their people voted. And while Persia still dwarfed them in size and resources, it was not built to understand minds that disobeyed by choice. When Xerxes marched west, it wasn't just armies that clashed, it was worlds. And though Persia would remain a giant for centuries, cracks began to show. Not in its walls, but in its story. Then came Alexander, the Macedonian lightning bolt that fell from the north, raised on tales of Achilles and revenge. He crossed into Persia not with fear, but with fascination. He carried Cyrus's biography in his pack. At night, he studied the man he had come to defeat, not as an enemy, but as a blueprint. When he conquered Persia, Alexander did not destroy Cyrus's tomb. He visited it. He ordered it restored. He stood in silence before the simple inscription. No golden mask, no divine claim, just a stone reminder. I am Cyrus, who founded the Persian Empire. Do not envy me this bit of earth that covers my body. And Alexander wept, because he understood. True greatness is not in the gold you gather or the borders you draw, but in the legacy you leave when you're gone. Cyrus had forged an empire, but more than that, he had carved a code into the human idea of leadership. Rule with strength, but never without justice. Conquer with steel, but hold with compassion. Chronicles faded. Walls collapsed. Names were forgotten, but not his. To this day, long after the thrones have turned to dust, one man still rises from the silence of stone. The shepherd who became a king. The king who became an idea. Cyrus the Great.